June 9th, 2024. A date that slipped past most of the world without a second thought. No dramatic announcements, and no breaking news alerts, no emergency meetings at the White House or the Federal Reserve. Just silence. The kind of heavy, unnerving silence that comes right before everything changes. On that day, something remarkable happened in the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. A 50-year understanding between these two nations quietly came to an end. And with it, the invisible foundation that has kept the American dollar as the world's most powerful currency began to crack. Most people didn't notice. But in the halls of central banks and the offices of energy ministers around the world, everyone was paying attention. This is the story of the petrodollar, an arrangement so clever and so powerful that it turned American currency into something no other money in history has ever been. Absolutely essential for the entire global economy. For half a century, this system has allowed the United States to borrow endlessly, spend freely, and export its inflation to the rest of the world. It has been America's secret superpower, more valuable than any military base or aircraft carrier. But to understand what's crumbling right now, we need to go back to 1974. The world was in chaos. Gas stations across America had lines stretching for blocks. People waited hours just to fill their tanks. The oil-producing nations of OPEC had just shown the world what real economic power looked like by cutting off supply and watching prices explode. America was vulnerable, and everyone knew it. Then Henry Kissinger, the U.S. Secretary of State, made a deal with Saudi Arabia that would change everything. The arrangement was beautifully simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in U.S. dollars, every single barrel. And in return, America would protect Saudi Arabia with military might, advanced weapons, and an ironclad security guarantee. But here's where the genius really shows. This wasn't just about oil pricing. It's created something far more powerful. Suddenly, every country on Earth that needed oil, which was basically every industrialized nation, had to first get their hands on American dollars. Japan needed dollars. Germany needed dollars. China needed dollars. Everyone needed dollars, not because they loved America, but because they needed energy to survive. And energy could only be bought with greenbacks. June 9th, 2024. A date that slipped past most of the world without a second thought. No dramatic announcements, and no breaking news alerts, no emergency meetings at the White House or the Federal Reserve. Just silence. The kind of heavy, unnerving silence that comes right before everything changes. On that day, something remarkable happened in the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. A 50-year understanding between these two nations quietly came to an end. And with it, the invisible foundation that has kept the American dollar as the world's most powerful currency began to crack. Most people didn't notice. But in the halls of central banks and the offices of energy ministers around the world, everyone was paying attention. This is the story of the petrodollar, an arrangement so clever and so powerful that it turned American currency into something no other money in history has ever been. Absolutely essential for the entire global economy. For half a century, this system has allowed the United States to borrow endlessly, spend freely, and export its inflation to the rest of the world. It has been America's secret superpower, more valuable than any military base or aircraft carrier. But to understand what's crumbling right now, we need to go back to 1974. The world was in chaos. Gas stations across America had lines stretching for blocks. People waited hours just to fill their tanks. The oil-producing nations of OPEC had just shown the world what real economic power looked like by cutting off supply and watching prices explode. America was vulnerable, and everyone knew it. Then Henry Kissinger, the U.S. Secretary of State, made a deal with Saudi Arabia that would change everything. The arrangement was beautifully simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in U.S. dollars, every single barrel. And in return, America would protect Saudi Arabia with military might, advanced weapons, and an ironclad security guarantee. But here's where the genius really shows. This wasn't just about oil pricing. It's created something far more powerful. Suddenly, every country on Earth that needed oil, which was basically every industrialized nation, had to first get their hands on American dollars. Japan needed dollars. Germany needed dollars. China needed dollars. Everyone needed dollars, not because they loved America, but because they needed energy to survive. And energy could only be bought with greenbacks. Every empire, no matter how powerful, eventually shows its weaknesses. And for the petrodollar system, that weakness turned out to be something that seemed like strength at first: the ability to use money as a weapon. Over the past 20 years, America discovered it could punish countries without ever firing a shot. All it had to do was cut them off from the dollar system. Russia got sanctioned, Iran got sanctioned, Venezuela, North Korea, and dozens of others found themselves locked out of international banking. The US could freeze their money, block their transactions, and essentially exile them from the global financial system with a few keystrokes. At first, this seemed brilliant. America was wielding its economic power to enforce its foreign policy. But every action has consequences, and other countries were watching very carefully. They saw what happened when you fell out of favor with Washington. Your money, even though it was supposedly yours, could vanish overnight. Your reserves, held in dollars and stored in Western banks, could be frozen. Your ability to trade could be destroyed. And they started asking themselves a terrifying question: if this could happen to Russia, could it happen to us? The numbers tell the story. In the year 2000, about 73% of all the money held by central banks around the world was in US dollars. By 2025, that number had dropped to just 56%. That might not sound dramatic, but in the conservative world of central banking, it's an earthquake. That's the sharpest decline since World War II, and it's accelerating. Then came 2022, and everything changed. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Western nations did something unprecedented. They froze roughly $300 billion of Russian reserves held in dollars and euros. It was a powerful economic punch designed to cripple Russia's ability to finance its war. But it also sent shockwaves through every finance ministry on the planet. The message was crystal clear: your dollar reserves aren't really yours if we decide they re-not. Russia responded by dumping nearly all its remaining dollar holdings and buying gold instead, because gold can't be frozen by hostile governments. And suddenly, central banks everywhere started doing the same thing. In just 2 years, 2023 and 2024, central banks bought over 2,000 tons of gold. To put that in perspective, the average from 2010 to 2021 was just 473 tons per year. China, India, Turkey, Poland, they're all stockpiling gold like there's no tomorrow. This isn't panic. This is insurance. When one power starts to weaken, another rises to take its place. That's the law of geopolitics, and China has been studying that law very carefully. Beijing isn't trying to destroy the dollar overnight or create some dramatic confrontation. They're playing a much smarter, longer game. Instead of fighting America and Western financial markets, where the US has every advantage, China is quietly building a parallel system, piece by piece, transaction by transaction. Start with oil. In 2018, China launched something called the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, where oil futures are traded in Chinese yuan instead of dollars. At first, hardly anyone paid attention. But by 2024, trading volume had surged 60% in a single year. Today, about 1/5 of certain oil benchmark trades happen in yuan. That number was basically zero just 5 years ago. But oil is just the beginning. China and Brazil signed deals worth $80 billion to trade soybeans in yuan instead of dollars. India is buying Russian oil and paying in rupees. Indonesia announced it's setting up currency operations centered on the yuan. One country at a time, one commodity at a time, alternatives to the dollar are becoming real. Then there's BRICS, the alliance that started with just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It seemed like a talking shop for years, something diplomats discussed but didn't really matter. Not anymore. BRICS has expanded to include Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Argentina. Think about what that means. These countries together control 46 million barrels of oil production every single day. They represent 45% of the world's population and roughly 37% of global economic output. They're increasingly trading with each other in their own currencies, not dollars. The real game changer is China's payment system called CIPS, which stands for Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. It's basically China's answer to SWIFT, the Western-controlled network that handles most international money transfers. As of mid-2025, nearly 1,500 banks in 109 countries are connected to SIPs. The system processed almost $20 trillion in the first 5 months of 2025 alone, up over 21% from the previous year. The infrastructure for a world beyond dollar dominance isn't coming. It's already here. Which brings us back to that quiet day in June 2024. News started circulating that a 50-year agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia had expired without being renewed. Now historians debate whether there was ever a formal written treaty. But here is what we know for certain. Saudi Arabia is no longer exclusively selling oil in dollars. That's not speculation. That's documented fact. Today, Saudi Arabia accepts payment in Chinese yuan, euros, Japanese yen, and Indian rupees. This isn't a symbolic gesture or a trial program. This is a fundamental strategic shift. The Saudis are literally rewriting the rules that have governed global energy markets for half a century. And they're doing it as part of their Vision 2030 plan, an ambitious blueprint to transform their economy and reduce dependence on any single country or currency. The security arrangement has changed too. September 2025, Saudi Arabia signed a strategic defense agreement with Pakistan, a nuclear-armed nation. Think about what that means. For 50 years, Saudi security was guaranteed by American military might. Now they're hedging their bets, diversifying their protection the same way they're diversifying their currency exposure. The impact is already visible in the numbers. While roughly 80% of global oil trade still happens in dollars today, that's down from nearly 100% just a few years ago. Brazil's central bank reduced its dollar holdings from 75% to 63% of its reserves, while boosting yuan to 15%. Indonesia, Egypt, and the UAE are making similar moves. The most striking numbers come from China's trade relationships. In the first quarter of 2025, 92% of trade between China and Russia was settled in yuan or rubles, not dollars. With Iran, it's 84%. With Pakistan, 76%. Even with Brazil, yuan settlements hit 41%. These aren't experimental programs anymore. This is the new reality of international trade. The petrodollar isn't dead, but it's no longer the only game in town, and its market share is shrinking faster than most people realize. So what does all this actually mean for regular people, for America, for the world? The consequences are profound, and they'll touch everyone's lives, even if most people never realize why things are changing. For the United States, losing petrodollar dominance means losing what economists call exorbitant privilege. For decades, America has been able to borrow money more cheaply than any other nation because the whole world needed dollars and therefore wanted to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. As that demand decreases, borrowing costs will rise. Government will pay more interest on the national debt, means either higher taxes, reduced spending, or more inflation. For ordinary Americans, expect higher prices on imported goods, from electronics to clothing to food, because the dollar won't stretch as far as it used to. But this isn't necessarily a disaster. It's a transition. Experts generally see 3 possible scenarios for how this plays out. The first is managed evolution, where the dollar slowly loses market share over decades, but remains the dominant currency. It's like watching a sunset, slow and gradual. Most analysts think this is the most likely outcome. The second scenario is external shock, where some sudden crisis, be a war, a financial meltdown, or a technological breakthrough, dramatically accelerates the shift away from dollars. Paradoxically, it could drive everyone back to dollars as a safe haven during chaos. This scenario is unpredictable by nature. The third scenario is rapid shift to Asia, where Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states make a decisive strategic pivot toward China BRICS. Launches a credible common currency and dollar dominance collapses within a decade rather than gradually fading over generations. What often gets missed in these discussions is that for much of the world, especially developing nations, this transition represents opportunity, not catastrophe. The ability to trade in your own currency means lower transaction costs and less vulnerability. 2 American political decisions. A multipolar financial system could actually be more stable and fair than one dominated by a single superpower. So here's the question everyone wants answered. Will the petrodollar empire crumble? The honest answer is both yes and no, and understanding that paradox is the key to understanding what's really happening. The monopoly is already crumbling. That part is undeniable. The exclusive arrangement where oil could only be bought with dollars is over. The 50-year period when America had unchallenged dominance in energy markets has ended. That ship has sailed, and it's not coming back. But the dollar itself, it's a different story entirely. The dollar isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Even though its share of global reserves has fallen to 56%, that's still more than the euro, yen, and yuan combined. Think about that for a moment. After everything we've discussed, after all the alternatives and all the shifts, the dollar still dominates. Why? Because the United States still has the deepest financial markets in the world, the strongest rule of law, and the most liquid assets. You can buy or sell billions of dollars worth of U.S. Treasury bonds in seconds without moving the price. Try doing that with yuan or rupees. These advantages don't vanish overnight, and they won't vanish in the next decade either. What we're witnessing isn't the death of the dollar, it's the birth of something new. Something the world hasn't seen in generations. A truly multipolar financial system where power is shared, where alternatives exist, where monopolies give way to competition. This transition will take years, probably decades. It's going to be messy. Financial markets will swing wildly. Geopolitical tensions will rise as old powers try to hold on and new powers try to break through. There will be crises and setbacks and moments when it seems like nothing is changing at all. But it is changing. Not because anyone sat down and planned it this way, but because the fundamental forces that created the petrodollar in the first place are all weakening. American military dominance isn't what it was in 1974. OPEC no longer speaks with one voice. Alternatives to the dollar now exist when they didn't before. Technology has made it easier than ever to trade in multiple currencies. The real question isn't when the petrodollar empire will crumble. The real question is, what kind of world are we building to replace it? A world of competing currencies and digital money? A world of regional payment systems and commodity-backed instruments? A world where financial power is distributed among many nations instead of concentrated in one? And what rises from those ruins might actually be something better, something more balanced, something that reflects the world as it actually is, rather than as it was 50 years ago. The only real question left is this: are we ready for what comes next?